everybody, and welcome to the second Dissecting Fiction podcast Christmas special. I'm Vinny Murphy.
I'm Christian Cutlick.
And on this one, we're going to be talking a little bit about some holiday horror.
Yeah, this should be a fun one because action movies, at least around Christmas or based in Christmas, just tend to play with the idea and emotion of Christmas. Christmas horror tends to just completely throw it out the window or completely parody it.
Yeah, it's almost, most Christmas horror movies tend to kind of like attack Christmas or attack like icons of Christmas. Why don't you lead since I did the first one on the action episode?
So I'm going to go with a horror classic that I think everybody can agree on of one of the first slasher films, Black Christmas from 1974. This film I watched pretty recently with a bunch of my friends, but this film I feel like even though it's set during time of Christmas, I think it does a good job about not really parodying Christmas, but undermining that Christmas idea of people coming together or even Christmas icons without necessarily going to the obvious things of like Santa, Christmas trees, candy canes, things like that.
So I'm going to agree with you here. That's actually was my pick too, is Black Christmas. And I do agree with you. I think part of the genius of Black Christmas is it does a really effective job of taking like Christmas imagery and then making everything extremely uncomfortable.
Okay, so like in a lot of Christmas horror movies, especially like post 2001, post like 90s, a lot of times it's just like Santa going around killing people or like people in Christmas costumes like killing each other or fighting demons or whatever. Black Christmas doesn't really do that. It kind of evolves more as like a mystery. And I think that's really interesting. It takes a lot of cues from like Psycho and Hitchcock films.
Black Christmas is interesting to watch. I just watched it really recently while I was trying to determine what film I was going to pick. You know, since we did both pick the same film, I'm going to kind of like talk about why I didn't pick others. You know, Silent Night, Deadly Night was in the running for me from the beginning. I probably have watched that at least a dozen times and more than I've watched Black Christmas. That one does exactly what you were just saying, though. It really just takes the idea of someone dressed up as Santa and already being like unhinged and just murdering people. Other ones in the running were like Michael Dougherty's The Krampus, which was cool. It actually holds up a lot better the second viewing than I thought it would. But I don't know, it never like landed with me. And then I think the only other thing I was really thinking was New Year's Evil, which I love.
I thought you were going to say Santa's Sleigh.
No, see, not big on that. New Year's Evil I like because, you know, we were talking about the idea of Christmas being literally holy. Like, literally this idea and all of these good feelings and goodwill toward man and all this. The reason New Year's Evil was almost my pick is because New Year's Eve is like a little more sinister to start. Like, it's about debauchery to a certain extent. And so, like, that movie really embraces it. So that was probably my second. But Black Christmas is just so horrific. Like, it is, without showing much, has scarier kills. It creates this feeling of unease the entire time you're watching it. And you have to give it time to work. Like, if you start watching it, you're going to think like, oh, this is just another like 70s like horror movie. It creeps up on you, the story.
It's incredibly clever in a lot of ways because it throws you a lot of red herrings. And I think that's why it works so well. And it's also like, they're so close to solving the mystery the entire time. It's literally right above their heads. It's in the attic. And like no one thinks to check the attic. And it's a little frustrating, but at the same time, like, as the film unfolds, like, you kind of think of it less and less.
Yeah, and you start to get affected by the creepiness of the killer. It starts off where he's really, like, being incredibly vulgar and, like, just sort of almost, like, sophomoric to an extent.
Yeah, you think it's just literally a prank caller.
And then it evolves into, like, all right, this isn't stopping. And this guy won't stop calling. And you start listening to more how he's behaving on the other side of the phone, which I think is ingenious. And you're like, oh, holy crap, this guy's like unhinged. Mm-hmm. And like the characters start to realize this along with you. They also set up, you know, as you're saying, like a bunch of red herrings. Like you don't really know what the point is. You don't know who the main character is. That takes a while into the movie before you really understand what's going on.
When I first saw it, I thought like, oh, you know, you had the virgin character. Like literally, like, oh, you know, virgin, whatever. She doesn't party. So I was like, oh, she's obviously going to survive. She's the first one that gets killed. And because of that, it's like, well, now I don't know what's really going to happen. And it's like, even though this was before, like, all those horror tropes really evolved, this is 74 after all, that one kill, like, helps set up the rest of the film.
I don't think we should give away the ending on this one, just because if someone hasn't seen it, I want it to be effective. But, you know, like, that first kill becomes almost, like, symbolic of the entire situation as the movie continues. I don't want to give away specifics. I will say there's some absolutely stunning cinematography in this movie, which is just for a horror movie made in 1974 doesn't happen.
Like, there's a very haunting imagery of where the body is kept and how it's kept. And because of that, when you do see it, it's shocking. Even though it's not very gory, there's just like a look of shock on the person's face. And I think that's what really, like, scares you. And it feels very realistic despite the, I guess, kind of unrealistic premise of it.
I wouldn't say that it's unrealistic really in any way outside of maybe the end you feel like, oh, why did no one think of that? But I kind of disagree because I feel like it could get overlooked the way that the movie ends. But I think that subtlety to the kills makes it feel more realistic, whether or not that violence would have produced gorier effects in real life, which, you know, it could go either way in reality. You know, like sometimes things are really bloody and weird, but it makes the kill not the focus. It makes the death the focus.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, absolutely, because you see the body a lot. You don't see the gore. And you kind of get a weird sense of loss, especially throughout the whole film. They're, like, looking for her. And more they realize, like, I think she's dead. Especially when they find, like, other evidence and everything. And I think that's kind of why it gets so scary towards the end.
Yeah, there is that creeping thing, like we said. You know, there's a lot of motifs, there's a lot of plot devices that start, like, occurring over and over. And it becomes, like, draining emotionally. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't want the killer to call again. Like, you're done with it. You don't want to hear him talk anymore. And it just keeps hammering you and hammering you. You know, it's funny, like, a bit ago I made a comment about, like, you don't get horror movies like that in 1974. I think that actually is underplaying it. I think you don't get horror movies like that most of the time. Sure, you'll hit your, like, Exorcists and your big hits that, you know, are really well produced. But, like, most horror movies don't care how well produced they are. They could be effective or not. I think this does stand up against any horror movie that's come out since.
I do want to go to the killer because when I was talking about the unrealism, I kind of was talking about the killer himself. Because even towards the end of the film, he becomes more of like a vague emotion. But at the beginning, he feels very unrealistic because he's singing like all these Christmas rhymes to the girls. But the way he sings them is very disturbing. And then it kind of twists them on his head. I think that's where it gets really interesting because it's just, like you said earlier, it's playing on these Christmas like themes and songs and distorting them.
Yeah, it's a lot of juxtaposition. It's a lot of like violent imagery next to like Christmas trees. A lot of, you know, it's like slowly picking apart at your emotions. This is what makes it so incredible. You know, we did actually mention this on the Halloween episode, that Halloween started out as a sequel to Black Christmas.
That we did.
And you can see where maybe Michael Myers came out of this, but he's not the same character that you get in the movie, who I guess has been nicknamed Billy.
I think they both embody the same kind of terror of just some whack job breaking into your house with basically no motivation other than to kill you. And I think the Halloween movies turn that into a more supernatural thing, especially the sequels.
As they go on, yeah.
And here there is a supernatural aspect, especially towards the end. But it's that same emotion of just like something crazy just attacking you.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit on the supernatural at the end of Black Christmas. I think definitely in Halloween, and you can see where the ending of Halloween reflects the ending of Black Christmas. But I've said this a few times in the last couple of years. I think Black Christmas is the best ending in any movie I've ever seen. It's definitely the scariest ending to any horror movie I've ever seen. And once again, that's not from, you know, a monster like jumping into frame in the last second or anything. It's because of the implication of what's happening and perhaps still happening.
I talked about how, like, they're so close always to solving the mystery. And I think there's a big tragedy at the end of the film.
I would agree with that.
And it's because of that ending and how close they are to everything. But yet so far away.
And once again, that ending again goes back to juxtaposing the really violent imagery against the Christmas backdrop.
It basically zooms out on a Christmas song.
Right. There's nothing over the top about the end. It's very subtle, but it leaves you with that feeling of dread that you've now had for like a half an hour.
After all this loudness, it just becomes very quiet again, and you're just waiting for the storm to come. So, even though we both picked the same Christmas movie, I feel like this was interesting.
I don't think it's a coincidence that we're both drawn to the same Christmas horror movie. As, you know, you started off by saying, Christmas horror movies tend to be a little gimmicky, a little hokey. Black Christmas isn't, which immediately makes it stand out. And it's also just a really cool movie. And then Bob Clark, he's going to come up again, I know, at least in my picks, the director, for something that you're not going to fucking believe if you don't know. But for this episode, I guess that's going to be it. Thank you for listening. You can check us out on most major podcast platforms. We're also still on YouTube, and we have our website, dissectingfiction.com. We are on most prominent social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Vero.
Everyone loves Vero.
Everyone loves Vero. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.